Welcome to Dr. Creepin's Dungeon. Uniquely weird things scare us because they sit just outside the boundaries of what our brains consider normal or predictable. When something is almost familiar but twisted in a way we can't explain, it disrupts our sense of safety and forces our minds to work overtime trying to understand it. This gap between recognition and confusion triggers a primal alert system. If we can't recognize a thing, categorize it, we can't judge whether it's dangerous. That uncertainty, that feeling of something's wrong but I don't know what, is exactly what makes the strange and uncanny so deeply unsettling, as we shall see in tonight's collection of stories. Now, as ever before we begin, a word of caution. Tonight's tales may contain strong language as well as descriptions of violence and horrific imagery. That sounds like your kind of thing. Then let's begin.
Crius by Red Hot Owl. The American writer of horror fiction, best known for his creation of the Cthulhu mythos, H.P. Lovecraft once said, "The oldest and strangest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is the fear of the unknown." Well, an iconic quote to be certain, yet I must respectfully disagree with Mr. Lovecraft. The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind isn't fear of the unknown. It's our obsession with understanding it. Fear is but a stepping stone to be conquered. Curiosity, on the other hand, is relentless, uncompromising. It's our curiosity that defines us as a species, and it is said that curiosity will eventually be our downfall. My name is Monica Schultz. I'm originally from Germany, but I was scouted fairly early in my fledgling career. I'm a marine biologist of sorts. I work for a subdivision of the US government that specializes in the discovery and study of anomalous aquatic life. My occupation might seem oddly specific at first, but you can rest assured that we exist for a reason. Keep listening, and you'll soon find out why. You've probably heard of the infamous bloop at some point in your life. In the unlikely event that you haven't, the bloop was a powerful, ultra-low frequency underwater sound of uncertain origin detected by the National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration in 1997. It was a recurring topic of discussion by both scientists and the media alike for over a decade. Until in 2012, the NOAA went on to disprove some of the bolder theories, stating that the sound appears to be consistent with noises generated via Arctic glacial movements. Or at least that's the explanation that they came up with after we pressured them into covering it up. The reason we did that is because earlier that same year, the sound was detected once again. However, this time we had the modern equipment necessary to pinpoint the general location of its source. An expedition was promptly organized. When the first sets of data and images came back, none of us knew how to react. I can only imagine how the first scientists must have felt once they realized the sheer scale of what resided directly below them. Now, I've made my fair share of unconventional discoveries over the years. Ancient sunken cities, deep-sea creatures that border on the mythical, entire ecosystems comprised of bizarre, downright alien flora and fauna. And yet, nothing could have prepared me for what we ended up finding down there. Dwelling in the cold depths of the Southern Ocean, beneath its expansive sheet of ice. I could hardly tell what I was looking at initially, but it was clearly massive in scale, since, even from a distance, the probe could fit only a fraction of its mass in a single frame. It resembled an enormous glob of blubbery, pinkish flesh, suspended less than a mile from the bottom of the ocean. With the aid of different echo-sounding measurement techniques, on-site personnel were able to determine that the globular structure appeared to be occupying a space of about 1 kilometer. You don't have to be an expert to know that an organism of such ridiculous size shouldn't exist. In spite of that, further research proved that it was indeed organic in nature, single-handedly demolishing a lot of our preconceived notions about the reality of life on Earth. Thus began Project Ultrafauna. Our purpose was to study and understand this impossible organism, which we later dubbed Crius, after one of the titans in Greek mythology. Back at the start of 2013, I was deployed to our newly established base in Antarctica. I wasn't the sole researcher there, but I was the most experienced, especially in my particular field. The privilege of studying such a phenomenon up close and personal more than made up for the unpleasant work conditions. Well, in a way, I saw this opportunity as the culmination of my entire career. The first order of business was to install a 24/7 underwater surveillance system around the subject. This proved to be a challenge given its colossal size and the depth at which it resided. Thankfully, its movement seemed extremely restricted, limited to the clusters of thin tendrils and appendage-like growths scattered across its otherwise dormant mass, each possessing a maximum reach of about 200 meters. Initial observations determined their function to be primarily defensive. One of our drones was immediately ensnared, crushed and torn apart upon attempting to collect a sample. Crius reacted in much the same way when approached by other sea life as well. They didn't utilize any of the material left behind. There were literal whale carcasses left to just float there, decomposing at the bottom of the abyss. Well, this posed the question as to how something so absurdly giant could even sustain itself to begin with. Apart from its pseudo-tentacles, the surface of Crius was an expanse of smooth, pulsating flesh. No orifices to be seen. One of my colleagues proposed an interesting theory. Perhaps its outermost layer acted as a filter, and its source of food was the microorganisms and bacteria it deliberately cultivated by leaving behind dead tissue. Well, of course, we couldn't confirm any of that without a sample, and the idea that an entity of such immense scale survived solely on a diet of microorganisms was far-fetched, to say the least. It didn't seem to produce any waste that we could analyze either. We attempted sending multiple drones out at once, each approaching from a different angle, but the result was the same every time. They were destroyed as soon as they got within 200 meters of Crius. Government funding or not, we couldn't just keep throwing expensive tech at it and hope for the best. Around that time was when the first incident happened. His name was Gregory, one of our lead engineers. I'd always known him to be a reserved and stoic man, an old-fashioned professional, so imagine my surprise when he kicked open the door to the monitoring station and threatened all of us at gunpoint. He looked completely out of his mind, slapping the side of his head with one hand while holding the gun with the other, spewing nonsense that we couldn't decipher. There were already traces of blood splattered across his face and overalls, which we later found out were from the guard he'd ambushed with a pipe wrench before stealing his sidearm. Upon noticing the large screen that displayed a grid of all the video feeds we had of Crius, he let out the most pitiful wail I'd ever heard a man produce, and opened fire on the equipment. We took cover as sparks and bullets began to fly. I winced every time something flew over my head, half expecting it to graze my skull. Whatever his true motives were, he did manage to destroy a significant chunk of our hardware before shoving the barrel in his own mouth and pulling the trigger. He didn't get the quick and painless death he was likely hoping for either, though. His aim was a bit too off-center, and he ended up blowing half of his jaw off instead. Of course, the poor bastard was already presumed dead by the time security finally showed up, slumped against a wall and sitting in a pool of his own blood. All research was temporarily put on hold while we waited for the replacement equipment to arrive. That and, naturally, we needed some time to recover from this ordeal. Like I mentioned before, Gregory was always known as the reliable veteran, the grumpy old-timer who'd seen it all. I couldn't even begin to speculate as to what could have driven him to such a state. The next similar incident was with our lead physician, Dr. Lee, who'd apparently locked herself in the sickbay and refused to come out. After she'd altogether stopped responding, on-site security were called to manually disable the lock, only to find her limp body sprawled across the exam table, half clutching a syringe. Her colleagues were immediately able to conclude that she had committed suicide via a lethal injection of pentobarbital. Prior to taking her life, she had also seized what medical supplies she could and tried to dispose of them by stuffing them down a toilet. Then there was my assistant, Bryce. From what I was told, he was caught trying to overload the central heating system and, not wanting to be captured and interrogated, used a piece of glass to slit his own throat. In addition to the alarming frequency at which they were occurring, each of these suicides seemed to double as deliberate attempts to sabotage our efforts. All of the victims had close to nothing in common, so trying to establish some sort of connection between them quickly proved to be a hopeless endeavor. Time was becoming as precious a resource as any. The bigwigs back home were starting to get impatient. Admittedly, we hadn't made much progress. It was difficult to focus on the job when you didn't know if the person next to you was teetering on the verge of a manic episode. We started hearing rumors that the military were itching to get involved, as they viewed the existence of Crius as a matter of national and global security. Don't ask me how they came up with such a conclusion. Our report certainly didn't reflect their concerns. Regardless, we were given an ultimatum. We had exactly 2 months to figure out what Crius was and how it worked. Otherwise, we'd be taken off the project and, well, likely terminated in order to prevent a leak. The pressure was on. I only slept for about 3 hours every other day. To say that most of us were running on fumes would have been an understatement. We were like walking automatons, going through the motions that we were programmed to do and wasting little energy on anything else. Adding to the oppressive atmosphere was the arrival of the winter season, which, here, means weeks of near-perpetual darkness. It also came as no surprise when another death was confirmed. The victim this time was a fellow researcher who was found dead in his cabin, lying naked in the middle of it with a large, horizontal slice across his stomach and covered in multiple punctures. A quick toxicology report, coupled with the empty pill bottles found littering his bed and nightstand, suggested that the initial cause of death was likely voluntary. Of course, that also meant that all of the injuries were done by somebody post-mortem. They were far too surgical and severe to be self-inflicted. The cut in the man's abdomen, in particular, seemed to have been forcefully stretched open. Somebody had been picking through his guts and then using the residue to finger paint on the claustrophobic cabin's singular window. Although I wasn't present, nor was I allowed anywhere near the victim's quarters, since it technically wasn't my job to look into such matters, I did see a recreation of the grisly drawing, if you can even call it that. I'm not sure exactly how to describe it. It resembled a simple stick figure with extra arms and legs, and enclosed in a larger circle. The whole thing was oddly ritualistic, quite unlike the previous cases that seemed more focused on inciting panic and discord among the crew. Yes, this whole thing was oddly ritualistic, quite unlike the previous cases. But as unnerving as it all was, I couldn't afford to dwell on it for too long. We were getting closer to our first breakthrough since I got here. One of our hydrophone arrays managed to isolate a low, almost radio-like frequency emanating from somewhere within Crius's core. Though I wouldn't call it electronic in nature, it also wasn't consistent with anything a purely biological organism should have been capable of producing. Honestly, it was downright alien. No wonder we hadn't noticed it previously. It was a bold assumption, but could this constant, near undetectable sound be the reason why people were killing themselves? The prospect of certain sound patterns affecting one's mental state isn't exactly a foreign concept, especially if you happen to work for the US government. Like the tendrils, perhaps this was just another defensive mechanism, albeit a more subtle one. In the wake of this new revelation, an idea emerged. What if we were to try and replicate the signal? Well, the goal was to elicit some sort of reaction or possibly even acknowledgement from the immense creature. It was a stretch, but then again we were already grasping at straws. Even if my assumption about the frequency's purpose was correct, it wasn't like they were going to prematurely end the project because of it. The mission was much too important. Fortunately, a couple of the staff had backgrounds in audio engineering, making the process a whole lot easier than it would have been otherwise. Not so fortunate was the fact that our work kept getting disrupted by the escalating number of suicides. By day 20 of our 2-month deadline, Nearly 1/3 of my research team were gone. People that looked completely stable one day were dead the next. Some of the bodies were discovered in various stages of dissection, their blood used to decorate the walls with that same symbol. While the deaths themselves were impossible to predict, I couldn't help but wonder how our unnamed corpse desecrator kept getting away with it. There were cameras virtually everywhere, and surely somebody would have identified them. It was almost as if our overseers were allowing this madness to continue. I'll never forget standing outside my room, coffee in hand, and looking down at the severed human finger lying at my doorstep. There was a crimson trail leading away from it and towards the shared bathroom. I knew that I was being baited, but I didn't care. My morbid curiosity outweighed my need for self-preservation. Whoever was doing this was clearly trying to show me something, and frankly I was fed up with having more questions than answers. And so, like a good little lab rat, I followed the proverbial cheese trail to its source. As soon as I saw that the door to one of the stores was hanging open, inviting me to peek inside, I already knew what I was going to find there. And sure enough, there it was. The body of the young man to whom the finger belonged to, stripped and propped against the toilet. His intestines spilled over his lap and onto the floor, forming a pile. His head hung at an angle, green eyes clouded and vacant. His face didn't seem too familiar. Maybe one of the maintenance boys? There was a scalpel left embedded in his throat, likely the primary cause of death, before the body was further mutilated. Painted onto the ivory tiles behind him was the, by that point, all too familiar calling card, a multi-limbed figure with a circle drawn around it, as though trapped within the boundaries of the shape. And that's when the realization finally struck me. It was so obvious. How did I not think of it sooner? I practically sprinted out of the bathroom and down the dimly lit hallway. My heart was racing. Beads of anxious sweat trickled down my brow. I must have seemed deranged as I emerged into the mess hall where most of my crew were having breakfast. Before anyone could accuse me of having lost my mind, I snatched a hard-boiled egg from a colleague's tray and held it up to the fluorescent lights. "It's an egg," I laughed. "It's a goddamn egg." Well, it made so much sense. Crius wasn't just a vaguely spherical mass of writhing meat, but rather the organic vessel of the true Titan, waiting to be born. Its sole purpose was to sustain and protect whatever was developing inside of it, explaining its apparent lack of basic biological needs. I was immediately challenged on my rash deduction, but I was confident in its validity. I knew that I was right, and no one could convince me otherwise. Besides, I didn't need them to believe me, so long as everyone did their job. As we approached the dreaded deadline, our research center started looking more like a slaughterhouse. It became commonplace to spot the dismembered remains of some poor fool decorating the corridors. The last time I saw a guard was them hanging from the ceiling via the cord wrapped around their neck. The comparatively saner among us had to take matters into our own hands when it came to safeguarding our progress. Finally, on May 26, 2013, we deployed the transmitter. We wanted to sync it as close to the subject as possible before turning it on. The tension in the control room was palpable. What little remained of the original crew were gathered around the central monitor. This was it. We had neither the time, resources, nor staff to afford having to go back to the drawing board. The fate of our entire operation hinged on this one final experiment. If it failed, everything we endured thus far would have been for naught. I glanced at the dial in front of me and sighed. "Turning up the amplifier," I announced to a completely silent audience. Obviously we couldn't hear it, but we could see that the oversized speaker was beginning to vibrate. When viewed from above, it looked like an insignificant speck against the dark expanse of living tissue, the scale of which was still hard to believe. "Oh, come on, you bastard," somebody muttered behind me, anxiously gnawing away at his knuckles. We waited and waited, but nothing happened. There were no spikes in the measurements, no visual signs of stirring. The subject was as passive as ever. It was a far-fetched idea from the start, yet we'd convinced ourselves that it just had to work. It was the only thing keeping us going. All of the sacrifices, all of the casualties, there had to be some purpose to it all. After everything I'd done, everything I'd seen and been through, I wasn't going to let it end like this. I clenched my teeth and shoved past my distraught colleagues. None of them even acknowledged me until I picked up the radio. There were several military vessels patrolling the ocean around the frozen continent, and their purpose was to dissuade foreign powers from seizing a foothold. But I had other plans for them. This is Professor Schultz from Research Station B-55. If anybody hears me, please respond. It's an emergency. Well, it took some convincing acting, but I was able to finally get in contact with the captain of one of the ships, to whom I proceeded to breathlessly explain that they had to launch an attack on Crius. My justification was that the giant creature had turned hostile and was in the process of releasing some sort of toxin into the water, which, in addition to the untold ecological consequences, threatened to reveal the entire operation to the rest of the world. I stressed that time was of the essence and that they needed to act now before it was too late. A few of my subordinates tried to stop me, but the rest, that understood what must be done, piled onto them and held them down. Several missiles were launched. The impact was something to behold. As I predicted, the torpedoes were immediately intercepted by the grasping appendages, but the resulting explosion was enough to send ripples across the whole organic structure. After all, my goal wasn't to destroy it. No, it was to provoke it. We received word from the people stationed on the shore that they could feel the ice beneath them begin to rumble. The buzzing in the air became so loud that we could hear it without the aid of our audio equipment. This tinnitus-like ringing that just kept amplifying until I could no longer hear myself think. All of a sudden, it ceased entirely, granting us a rare moment of unimpeded clarity, during which I was able to reflect on what I'd just done. It would appear that the signal had been affecting all of us from the start, just in different ways. The men and women we lost understood its message for what it was, a warning to cease tampering with something we could never hope to understand, followed by the realization that death is the only true escape from the inherent defect that is human curiosity. For others of a similar mindset to my own, it had the exact opposite and likely inadvertent effect of stimulating our zealous obsession with knowing the unknowable, and pursuing said knowledge at the expense of all else, like moths to flames. I heard a familiar wail coming from the storage room, adjacent to where we were gathered. While the others remained glued to the screen, I stepped away from the console and went over to investigate. Hunched on the other side of the door was none other than Gregory, the engineer whose attempted suicide marked the start of our descent into madness. He appeared to have somehow survived, albeit with one half of his face stitched and stapled shut. Whoever treated him hadn't done all that good of a job. The wounds looked infected to the point that they were leaking pus. His right eye was red and swollen, clearly impairing his vision. He was kneeling beside yet another recently disemboweled carcass and looking down at his bloody hands in horror. It would appear that we'd found our elusive artist. With the signal temporarily gone and its influence over our minds subsiding, the unfortunate wretch was confronted with the reality of his actions. He turned his hideous expression towards me in an almost pleading manner, as though expecting me to assure him that none of this was his fault, that he too was the instrument of some higher power that transcends our limited comprehension. And then, it happened. The bloop, just as I'd heard it countless times in recordings, only much, much louder. I left Gregory to his lamenting and raced back to the control room. Barring a few of its destroyed limbs that were already starting to regrow, the surface of Crius appeared overall to be intact. We hadn't even made a dent. All readings showed that it also wasn't what was producing the high-amplitude sound. No, it was coming from somewhere else entirely. The radio cracked to life.
"Come in, B-55. We are detecting a large shape moving straight for us. Here's the target."
And that's the last we heard of them. I tried to re-establish contact with the rest of the patrol fleet, but nobody responded. The crew operating from the coastline described the sea as being deathly quiet. It was probably time to just call HQ, confess to what had happened, and request an extraction. Just as I was about to take a moment to regain my faculties and think of what to do next, we received yet another transmission from the shore.
Charles, you might want to see this."
The blurry face of the man in charge of handling the survey equipment appeared on our feed. He wiped the lens with his sleeve and turned the camera towards the ocean. Well, at first I didn't know what I was meant to be looking at precisely. The water was indeed eerily stagnant. It was as if I was looking at a murky pond, not a sea. Constellations lit up the sky, rivaling the moon with how brightly they shone. And then I finally made it out. There in the distance, beyond the glaciers, was what looked like a giant lamppost. It took me a minute to realize that one of the lights littering the sky was actually connected to a narrow stem that projected upwards from the ocean's surface. It blended so seamlessly with the view that I would have never noticed it if it hadn't shifted ever so slightly. Once I did, however, I couldn't pry my eyes away from it. Its silver luminescence was intoxicatingly soothing, like the sweet song of a siren, drawing you towards the center of a whirlpool. I could only imagine how alluring the dangling orb must have been in person.
A few of the lads said they were going to grab a boat and go check it out. I told them it was a bad idea, but they wouldn't listen. One even got violent when I tried to stop him. Started swinging at me, a lunatic.
The older man holding the camera explained. As a marine biologist, I'm not sure why it took me so long to realize what that thing obviously was. My best guess is that it was part of its intended effect on the viewer, overriding our senses and causing us to ignore the clear signs of danger in order to lure us in, much like an anglerfish lures its prey. Before I could yell for them to get the hell out of there, it was too late. All I could do was watch as the black ocean suddenly collapsed in on itself, revealing the all-consuming maw that awaited beneath it. Teeth the size of radio towers broke the surface and eclipsed everything, eventually even the sky. To my absolute horror, I realized that we were looking at the inside of an enormous jaw, which meant that the rest of it was somewhere behind the camera. Dear God. Oh no. We heard the sound of ice cracking, followed by the panicked screams of our comrades. Our perspective tilted and then turned to static. No. Signal lost. One by one, all of our remaining video feeds went dark as well. There was no point in trying to reach out again. The outpost was lost, swallowed by an eldritch monstrosity along with everybody there. And it was all my fault. If my hypothesis was correct and Crius was indeed an egg, then logic dictates that what we just glimpsed must have been the thing that laid it. It's probably just protecting its nest. I'll call it a feeling, but now that we've intruded on its territory, I don't think that it's going to stay put for much longer. Sooner or later, all of humanity will be reminded of how truly insignificant we are. It's just a matter of time. And well, that's it. That's the story of everything that happened here. Nobody ever came to retrieve us. I guess the government's idea of disposing of us was to simply cut off all communications and leave us for dead. It's been close to 2 years now of surviving in this frozen wasteland. Most, if not all, of the others have either expired or gone insane. I've salvaged enough food to last me a couple of weeks, but I can't say the same for fuel, which is why I've decided that it's time to leave. If I'm going to freeze to death anyway, I'd rather it be out there than in here. I'm leaving this file on my personal computer just in case somebody does find this place. To whomever is reading it, first of all, screw you for not coming sooner. And second, you can find all of my research in the hidden compartment below the desk. Hopefully the majority of it is still legible. Do with it what you will. As for me, it's time for me to get going. Be safe, and remember, if you happen to see a light out there, think twice before following it. Nika's Shadow by MLycantrope. Every winter there's this thing that comes out of the lake and stalks my property. This is the 13th year this has happened. Every time it happens, I'm forced to stay indoors because I can't bear to hear its voice or to see its face. A face that it stole, a face that doesn't belong to it. This parody of a woman as it wanders around my property clad in swamp growth, screeching and moaning as it does. Somehow, it stole her face. Somehow it stole Nika's face. Nika and I met when we were kids. She was an orphan and my father had just passed away. We were both broken from a very young age. Looking back, I feel like she's the only person I ever loved besides my parents. We became fast friends, and by the time she was supposed to start her life as an adult, my mother had passed away too. I was so alone in this world, and so was Nika. Being familiar with the bottle already back then, I remember one night I offered her to come stay with me. I explained I had nobody besides her, and she laughed before her expression turned solemn again, noting that she didn't have anyone else besides me either. We moved in together, but not for long. Nika, who never knew a home or a family, couldn't stay too long in one place. She was a nomad, a flame without source or restraint. For all of her confidence and strength that she projected onto the world, she was lonely and hurt. I knew this much because, well, what we had was special. I could see it in her eyes. That's why I always let her go, because I always knew she'd come back, and she did. She'd disappear for a while, and then come back. Sometimes alone, sometimes with a man or a woman who she claimed to have feelings for. We both knew these were lies. She loved no one, truly. Well, she loved me, but it wasn't romantic. That was different. I've seen her break so many hearts, but she always professed to be concerned with only breaking mine. I kept telling her she could never do that, but that was a lie too. Yeah, she broke mine. Nika broke my heart the last time she came back. When she came back, she was different. Her skin was pale, her stature meek and gaunt. There wasn't much of her usual fiery self. She was cold, slow and fading. She never told me what had happened to her, but I knew she wouldn't last for long. I could see that in her eyes. Well, Nika always liked to drink. Besides me, that was her only other love. The last we'd lived together, though, she drunk like a horse. That's when I realized she wasn't making it out anymore. The same woman I've seen laugh through broken bones and torn organs, through hunger, through immense physical and emotional pain. She could beat all of that, but this time she wasn't beating the disease that ate at her. She never told me what it was, and I could never find the strength to make her tell me. She kept saying she'd be fine, but I knew she was lying. One night when we were about to go to sleep, as we lay in bed, she said she could see this black shadow standing there, looming over her, growing darker and colder with each passing day. She said she saw it pull out a thread from inside of her. A white little thread came out of her chest and into the shadow's mouth. Well, I thought she was being metaphorical about whatever she'd had, but she insisted on being literal, and we had a bit of an argument about it. I called her insane, and she laughed at me, calling me a psycho instead. She and I, we always had those minor arguments and disagreements. We didn't always see eye to eye, but these arguments, they ended with banter. I forgot about Nika's shadow, but couldn't unsee her deterioration. She withered away like a flower in the summer heat, becoming smaller, thinner. Her skin tightened around her body, becoming leathery. Those shining eyes of hers became sunken, while her cheekbones became more and more noticeable. Her strength was fading away. She spent days doing nothing but lying in bed. Sometimes she'd moan and cry weakly in her sleep. I couldn't do anything but watch, and it ate away at me. It gnawed at me to the point when I started drinking way too much. It got to the point I couldn't tell apart Nika's corpse-like appearance from my healthy-looking ideal of her. We spent days drinking and talking. I'd lie if I said I could remember what we talked about, or how long we spent like this, because I never remember anything from that period. I remember the taste of alcohol and misery in my mouth as I watched the only person I cared about being sucked out of this world by some sort of evil dressed in a man's shadow. Oh, I've seen the abomination. I've seen it once, and that was enough to burn it into my memory for all eternity. I woke up one night and found myself face to face with a pitch-black shadow standing over Nika. Its pernicious shape connected to her broken form with a white little thread. A barely visible one. Well, I wanted to move, but I couldn't. My body was frozen in place. The thing must have noticed me as I saw a thick, pure white smile form on its dome. When I saw that sickening smile, the room turned frozen, and I felt a knife pierce my chest. It sucked the air out of my lungs as the sound of my heartbeat bombarded my ears. I was choking on the void in my throat as the shadow smile grew larger and larger. Panicked, I tried moving, but nothing came. My body wasn't in my control anymore. My skin turned to marble, a statue stuck in place for as long as the demonic kept its invisible eyes locked on me. It simply faded, finally allowing me to break out of its spell. Once I pulled myself away, a knot formed in my stomach. I let out a scream and ended up puking all over myself. Thankfully, I didn't wake Nika up. I remember her face, though, from that night. She seemed so comfortable, so calm. The morning after, I told her about the shadow. She looked at me like she'd seen a ghost before bursting out into pained laughter. She admitted that the shadow man was just a joke she'd pulled on me. And yet, I've seen it. I was adamant about knowing what I'd seen. Well, she wouldn't believe me, however, instead saying that she must have finally driven me mad like everyone else she came into contact with. She said I was losing it. Well, she wasn't entirely wrong. I was losing it. I was losing her. Not long after, I found her body in the bathtub, cold and still. And something inside of me broke. A sharp pain shot through my body as I watched her lifeless body floating in the water. It wasn't purely emotional. It was quite physical, this pain. I felt like I'd lost a part of my body. I couldn't move my gaze away. Her form transfixed me in place. Feeling the tears streaming down my face, I couldn't feel anything else. Nothing at all. It's like it threw me into a vacuum of emotions. Nothing came in, nothing went out. Nothing moved, nothing changed. Everything stayed motionless. Colorless. I remember little from that day or any day after that one for a long, long time. I don't know how long. All I know is that there was a lot of booze, a black hole inside, and the corpse of my beloved Nika laying in one room. My mind snapped. I was so lost and not hurting, just lost and floating in absolute nothingness, not in a good way. Trapped inside my little bubble of pleasant memories and mimetic happiness with a person who was gone forever. The days bled into weeks, and those soon became months. It all flashed by me like a little spark. I didn't care. At that point, I didn't care about anything at all. I was too busy drowning myself in alcohol, hoping to feel something. No sensations came, however, and at one point even the alcohol started losing its burning edge, slowly turning into a hydrant rather than an intoxicant. She filled the house with the stench of decay, but I could barely register that. I was far too gone at this point. I didn't care about it. Nika's room became a horror show, her body slowly decomposing into a gooey puddle of brown and black material draped over a skeleton. I've been to that many times over the months. God, what haven't I done around those remains of hers? I prayed at her remains. I've cried on top of them, and I've spoken to them. Everything. I did it all. I was a madman who spoke to a decaying pile of bones and kept on crying just how much I loved them. Well, she was gone, but I couldn't let her body go even though not much had remained of it. I spent my days drinking and puking on myself or talking to the quickly disintegrating body. I spent my nights dreaming about drowning at the hands of Nika in the lake by the house. Soon enough, I fell in love with the thought of drowning in that freaking lake. Whenever I thought about just throwing myself into the waters with a rock tied around my neck, I remember just how peaceful and how beautiful she looked in death. Her form was impeccable to behold as I watched her float in the bathtub. And in these moments of grim recollection, I felt myself feel something again. Thinking about my death, I found peace. Somewhere deep down inside, I was dreaming of reuniting with her on the other side. And eventually my intrusive thoughts became even more prevalent, and I opted for that one last step towards immortality. Life had become nothing but a painful, monotonous chore, fueled by alcohol and self-destruction. Life was no longer worth it. Even cutting myself and burning myself with cigarette butts did nothing. I wasn't living. Instead, I was just an animated sack of shit and chemicals. I needed a way out. I wanted to see her again. She was calling me to join her in my dreams, begging me to follow her into the realm of endless darkness where she was so lonely and cold. Finally had enough and took that one last step. Well, tried to, anyway. There was nobody left in this world whom I'd care for. Not that there's anyone to care about me. After all, I had no bridges left, as everyone I'd ever loved had died. I think it's funny today, as the awful thing outside calls out my name using Nika's voice, demanding I come out, demanding I set it free. I let her go. I did. She forced me to let her go. Nika terrorized me from beyond the realm of the dead to let her go. She forced me to untangle myself from her filthy remains, and I did. I ended up burning whatever was left of her. Took a while, but I did. And now this thing, Nika's shadow, Nika's demon, still pretending like I have a part of her with me. The only thing I have now is memories. As the prospect of my ending is funny to me now, so was the prospect of remaining alive was back then. I was ready to end it all there and then. I set the whole thing up and was about to throw myself into the lake, a boulder tied with a strap to my neck as I watched the calm waters below. And for a moment I got lost in the serene scenery, almost able to find a semblance of joy in my own pitiful existence. Before I could notice, though, dark clouds covered the sky, slowly casting a gloomy shade over the beautiful scenery. As I watched the winds rocking the waters in the lake below, forming waves, I could hear a voice. It called me faintly from below. It felt airless and watery. I felt the tears streaming down my eyes, and I was about to reunite with my beloved. But then I looked down again. The sensation of a sharp knife pierced both my lungs as a scream echoed through the blackened skies. I fell down backwards, clenching the boulder and shivering with fear and disgust. Another awful scream pierced my eardrums, louder than the last. The waters in the lake rose as the winds became violent, bashing against my body, making my skin shiver even more. What I'd seen down below made little sense. Even thinking about it makes me shudder to this day. A third scream pierced the air, coinciding with a thunderclap, sending shockwaves through my body. It was my name. Something down below had screamed my name. Something furious, something irrational, a thing that shouldn't exist. Something so terrible even I couldn't handle watching it. A thing from my worst nightmares. I've never been so afraid in my entire life as I was in those moments. All feelings were back, in the form of sheer terror. Untying the strap that tied my neck to the boulder, I left it there and ran as fast as I could back home. I locked the door and the windows before running to Nika's room. Well, this time the stench of her mostly decayed body was almost unbearable. Even then I remained right by her, huddled next to the gore and decay-stained bed on which I had left her unburied remains. I spent the next 10 hours sitting on the floor, shaking in fear as images of that thing in the lake flashed themselves before my eyes repeatedly. I couldn't move. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't do anything as the panic slowly corrupted my mind, inserting impossible images into my eyes, slowly burning away at what remained of my sanity. Eventually, my body gave out and I passed out. When I woke up, the stench of death was far worse than it had been prior to when I'd fallen asleep. It was truly hellish. I ran out of the room, only to slip on a puddle of water. The whole hallway was wet. There shouldn't have been any water. My head was spinning, and I was groaning because of the pain pulsating in the back of my head. None of this made sense. I stumbled to the bathroom to wash my face and attempt to come back to my senses. The water in the bathtub was running, overflowing the tub, dripping onto the floor. I didn't turn it on. My heartbeat became rapid. My mind was going around itself in circles. Nothing made sense. I heard a breathy sigh behind me, and chills ran down my spine as I turned around slowly. There she was, in the mirror, her face contorted into pure rage and hatred, a parody of a once beautiful woman who had become a ghastly monstrosity that threatened to devour me there and then. I fell down and averted my gaze for a second. Mustering up all the courage I still had in me, I looked at the mirror, and she was gone. The thing that was in the lake somehow had followed me home. Well, these were my first encounters with it, but they wouldn't be the last. Over the next few weeks, this thing became a fixture of my life, a permanent reminder of my worst wound, the one that could never heal. The thing that would appear behind me and whisper awful things in my ear. It would stand there in the mirror and windows. It would stare and accuse me with its ugly, soulless black eyes. Somehow it would mess with the water and electricity in the house. It would stand there and stare at my Nika every time I went into her room. It would stand over me at night and hiss. Every time I saw this thing, I felt myself losing a part of myself. It would just stand there and make me feel like I'd be losing a piece. And this is what Nika spoke of when she said that there's a shadow that's sucking her out of existence. Though for me, there was no white thread, no void. I had to watch as the darkness of oblivion had twisted my only friend into a sick, decaying, ghoulish parody of herself to torment and mock my loss, and me. I finally lost it with this thing when I went into Nika's room, and it was beyond cold. It was painfully cold inside, dropping to near freezing temperatures. I left the window open to ventilate out the stench of death. Kneeling down beside her remains, I stayed there for a few moments, in total silence, just remembering the good times with her. Something cracked audibly in the room. I'd allowed myself to become so lost in thought I didn't notice the source of this cracking. I was only pulled out of my memories by the sound of a gasping skeleton as it awkwardly rose from the gore and decay-stained sheets, reaching out to me. I fell backward as my heartbeat became erratic. The room had gone suddenly even colder, and my body shook violently with fear as the skeletal remains of my dearly beloved pulled themselves up and crawled out towards me. I screamed and crawled away from the reanimated cadaver, but it followed me relentlessly. Too shocked to do anything, I kept on crawling until it grabbed a hold of my leg. At that point, I finally snapped. Whatever humanity remained in me died in that instant, and I just kicked the unliving hell out of this skeleton. Great happiness and terrible sadness overcame me at that moment. Somehow I found the strength and the will to get up and continuously beat on the perverted remains of what used to be Nika. I kept on beating and kicking those bones until I could do so no longer. Whatever took over the remains wouldn't get out either. In a moment of desperation, I made the hardest choice I'd ever had to make. With tears in my eyes and great pain weighing on my heart, I had to come to terms with my loss. I could no longer keep the one I loved by my side. Well, till death us do part, it said. For a good reason, it would seem. Dragging the unliving corpse of my beloved to the hearth, dousing the rotten, possessed bones in alcohol and throwing them into the fire. I couldn't watch as they burnt, and I couldn't stand the sound of the inhuman cries that emanated from within the flames. I drank myself into oblivion that day to forget my misery, but I was never successful in escaping it. That day, after I'd passed out from overconsumption, I had the worst kind of nightmare. I was dragging my beloved Nika to the shower. She was kicking and screaming weakly, resisting my grasp, but to no avail. She was too weak to break free. I shoved her face into the sink and turned on the water. Crying, tears burning my face, and muffled gargles cutting my eardrums, I watched as my body was killing the one person I'd ever loved. When she finally stopped moving, I placed her lifeless body in the tub and filled it with warm water. I watched her reawaken before shoving her head under the hot water once more. And then I woke up. It was dark and I was alone. Nika was gone, and with her, the shadow. I had a lot of mourning to do, but time partially heals all wounds. The days have become bearable as they turned into weeks and later into months. I was used to being alone, but the thought of being actually alone in this world always lingered in my mind. It still does. I still miss her every single day. Well, I know I'm alone, but that's the way I like it. Nika did indeed drive me mad, because I refused to replace her with anyone else. That being said, there's still something lusting after me out there. Every winter it comes back, wearing her form to torment me. I don't know what it is, but it's there, and as long as I'm inside, it can't reach me. I've learned that for the first time. I've seen it after cremating Nika. I've had that same terrible nightmare nearly a year after I encountered the undead. Waking up from it, drenched in a cold sweat, my heart still beating violently, I headed outside to cool off. I grabbed a smoke and my coat and went out. Finally, relaxing, I noticed someone walking around in the woods. I called out to them, remarking that few people visit this place. Once the person turned around to face me, my body tensed up and the shape filled my head with these ugly memories. Nika's twisted and perverted, dead face plastered to its head. A toothless grin ever so widening and sickening, pure white eyes contorted in pure hatred stared at me, wet black hair draped over its gaunt form. The thing noticed me and bolted right toward me. I saw it speeding in my direction, covering a great distance with each leap. Seeing its progression, I ran back inside, locking the door and the windows. I stood behind the door, waiting for it to make its move, but nothing came. It was dead silent, no banging or trying to break it. It was gone, seemingly. Well, it nearly gave me a heart attack while I passed the window. It just stood there, staring at me, its ugly, ghoulish face trying to say something. I don't know what it wants, nor do I care to know. I guess this thing that killed Nika is real. It's after me. And while it's here every time I go out, it tries to reach me, but I always go back inside as it's seemingly unable to enter the house. I'll stay indoors for the week or two it shows up for, and after that it disappears again until the next year. This is the 13th year Nika's shadow has been stalking me. A grim reminder of the things I've done, and the things I might have done but have purposefully erased from memory with copious amounts of alcohol. Well, they say that the moment the mirror does not recognize us anymore, the cards are no longer in our hands, and in effect we have failed to see to the bottom line of our life story, and thus lost our identity. A concept explored in tonight's story. The person on the other side of the mirror offered to trade places with me, by Corpse Child. Well, I'll admit it. I used to have a thing for always looking at myself in the mirror. It's not really a vanity thing, actually, more like the opposite. You see, I suffer from body dysmorphia, where you'd look at me and think, he's not bad looking, or even, he's kind of cute. I'd think I looked fugly as hell. The other thing with all that is that one moment I'll look in the mirror and think I look fine, but maybe 5 seconds later I start noticing things that I think make me look ugly. It's been this way for me since high school, and I don't expect it to get any better. I've developed anorexia because of it, and therapy has never really been much use to me. Now, I'm not asking for sympathy or help for this. Personally, I wouldn't have said anything about it at all if it didn't apply to why I'm writing this. After all, it's not exactly comfortable for me, a guy, to admit some shit like that. So, anyway, yeah, I'm almost always looking at myself in the mirror or some reflective surface. Again, it used to be a sort of method of self-assurance, though like I said, it never really helped. But ever since I saw it, my life has now changed in more horrific ways than I thought possible, and it's caused me to avoid mirrors entirely. What is it, you may ask? Well, good question. In fact, it's so good a question that it's why I have to write this. Maybe someone can shed a bit of light on exactly what the hell it is. I'll try to explain this the best way I can. I can't guarantee you'll understand it all. God knows I sure as hell don't. It was the night of my senior prom when I first saw it. I'd managed to actually land a date with Janet, a girl I'd been trying to ask out for most of that year, and that night I planned to pop that question to her during the slow dance part. That is, until I was grabbing punch from me and my girl when Eddie, Ditzy Eddie, decided to try and swing dance with his date right next to the punch bowl. He ended up sending the girl hurling straight into me, right as I was pouring Janet's drink, toppling the both of us over and causing punch to spill all over the both of us. Well, unfortunately, she landed right on top of me, and Janet didn't see me get knocked over by the girl. In other words, when she came over to the punch table, all she saw was a chick on top of me, all giggly and shit, like it was somehow funny to her, and that I'd just taken it. Janet immediately got pissed and decided to slosh another cupful in my face before storming out of the gymnasium. What was worse was that now everyone was staring at me, laughing their asses off. As quickly as I could, I made a break for the bathroom. Once inside, I propped the big trash can that they keep in the bathrooms against the door before looking into the mirror. I was coated in cherry punch and my hair was already getting sticky from it. It was also all over my brand new suit that I'd bought only a week ago, hoping to help make an impression to Janet. Fat chance of that. It was also drenched with red. It honestly looked like I'd just butchered somebody. Great job, Lenny, old pal, I thought bitterly, looking in the mirror. You lose the girl and you look shitter than ever. I grabbed one of the paper towels and began trying to clean myself up. Oh, yes, you do. At first I didn't really hear it, and I just kept wiping my face. It must have just been my inner self-loathing, I figured. Yeah, you really do look shit, Leonard. I'm surprised she even said yes in the first place. I looked up to the mirror to see my face smiling at me. Well, sort of. It's more like what I wished my face would look like. Strong, broad chin, as opposed to my pointy one that could cut through glass and solid ice with slick, well-combed hair and no glasses. In short, it, looked handsome. Perfect. Everything I wasn't. Hey, what the... Yep, I'm you. Well, actually, no. I'm what you aren't. I'm what you wish you could be. I stood still, slack-jawed. The reflection then smiled wider and said, I mean, just look at you. A failure, covered in punch and looking like a scarecrow that just got wasted. You couldn't possibly think you're going to pick up any dates the way you are. He then chuckled and said, unlike me. What the hell? What's going on here? I rubbed my eyes and looked at the mirror again. He was still there, my insulting reflection, still smiling almost deviously. So, just who the fuck are you? I snapped back at him. I told you. I'm what you wish you could be. I'm what you should be. What the hell is that supposed to mean? I'm just fine the way I am. Obviously, deep down, even I knew this was horseshit when I said it. Like I said, I've always had a problem with self-loathing. And of course, this thing wasn't stupid and immediately called my bluff. Yeah, that's a good one. You could be a comedian with lines like that. If you weren't such a fuck-up at everything. I mean, really, you honestly expect me to believe that you are just fine the way you are? For God's sake, just think about why you're even in here. I cocked my eyebrows in confusion. What's that supposed to mean? What are you even... I stopped, pinched the bridge of my nose and said, laughing, "Actually, you know what? Forget I asked. I don't even know why I'm even arguing this. You're my reflection. What do you know? You're not real." "Not real?" It spat. That's your first mistake. I am very real. As real as you are. Perhaps, It grinned wide again. Even more so. What? How are you more real? I mean, you only exist in a mirror. How does this make you better than me? I mean, besides the fact that I'm far better looking than you, how about I don't try to bullshit myself into believing that things are just fine the way they are, when they clearly aren't? At least I can honestly say things like, things are great the way they are, and it not be an obvious lie. And I was stumped. I wasn't sure which felt worse, which sent me more into a tailspin. The fact that I was having hallucinations in the mirror, arguing with them, or the fact that, somewhere deep inside, I felt like it was right. Either way, this was starting to irritate me, and I wanted to end this debate. "What's wrong?" it chided condescendingly. "Lost for words? No defense?" "Okay, look, aside from berating me to my face, is there an actual reason you showed up? What the hell do you want from me here?" It let out a chuckle and said, "I'm here because I'm actually a nice guy. I've come to offer you a way out, a way to be better, to be me." "What do you mean?" I watched him reach his hand out to me. "Come with me and I'll show you." I stood still. Nothing about this felt right to me. I mean, besides the obvious concern of my reflection is talking to me, something about what he was actually saying just seemed, well, somehow off. What was he talking about? Offering me a way to be better? Better how? Who, maybe what, even is he really? "Come on, what do you got to lose? Your dignity?" He snickered. "Oh, trust me, you've long since fucked that up." That's when I started losing my patience. Who was this asshole to kick me while I was already down? "Up yours," I spat venomously. And he almost immediately dropped the shit-eating grin he'd plastered on his face. For a moment he looked agitated, pissed off, like he was about to leap through the mirror and try to get me or something. Suddenly his mouth parted again into that deranged grin from before, and he said, "Well, suit yourself. I can wait." After that, he vanished, and my reflection was normal. A 5'1", lanky, shaggy-haired, four-eyed loser with ghostly pale skin and pimples covering 3/4 of his face. For a solid 5 minutes, I stood in the mirror, trying to make sure what I was seeing was the real thing. Finally, I splashed cold water on my face before leaving the bathroom. But from there, I immediately made my way out of school and to my car. Driving home, I thought about what had just happened. Admittedly, I figured most of this was just me imagining shit because I was down. Sort of like how you imagine yourself being given an award, or how you'd imagine girls throwing themselves at you when you're feeling good or confident. Only, of course, this was the opposite. Being mocked instead of praised. But there was still one thing that wasn't sitting well with me. What was it talking about? A chance to be like him. What did he mean by going with him? Go where? Into the mirror? What was he talking about when he said that he could wait? By the time I got home, I had no real conclusions other than I was just beating myself up over screwing things up at the dance. And being exhausted, I decided just to call it case closed with that. Oh, I'm just being too hard on myself. Just get some rest. Tomorrow, try to be more positive or something. So the next day, I decided to do just that. Decided to wear my favorite t-shirt and my leather jacket. I'd even decided I'd wear my shades instead of my glasses that day. Sure enough, it was actually kind of working. I actually felt good about myself. Well, in truth, I felt great. This made me want to check myself out in the mirror. At first, I was almost ecstatic. My confidence was through the roof. I looked like a badass. I thought I looked like the Terminator, albeit a very skinny, not in the least bit physically threatening one. Soon, though, it happened again. There he was, my bullying reflection in the mirror, complete with a shitty smirk stretched right across his face. "Wow, look at you, Lanny," he chided in a mocking voice. "You think you've got it, huh? You think you're a hot shit now because of some new threads." He chuckled and shook his head. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. "It's not real. He's not real. He's just in your head." "Wrong." My eyes snapped open again. Well, like last time, his mouth was stretched into a deranged grin. "I'm not in your head. If I was, we wouldn't be having this conversation, would we? We wouldn't need to." My heart started slowly racing. If this wasn't in my head, then... "But," he said, cutting my thoughts off dead in their tracks, "that's why I'm here. I want to be in your head. I want to be you." I caught my eyebrows at him. "What do you mean?" "I shouldn't be in here, Leonard. I'm what you should be. Think about it, you're always feeling it, aren't you? That sense you're not good enough. Hell, isn't that why you're always looking in the mirror?" This made my blood start to go cold. How do you... Because I am that piece. Everyone has it. That piece of them that they lack. The reason they can't ever feel good about themselves. It's why you can't ever feel content with yourself or anything you do. Why you're such a screw-up with life. "Oh yeah? So what? You be my saving grace? You, my reflection. You'll make my life better." I actually laughed at this. God, even if I believed you, why would I want to let you in? You're a jerk. All you do is spew insults at me. His smile fell and he sighed. "Well, what can I say? I call it like I see it in you, my friend." He whistled condescendingly. "Phew, damn." My anxiety was quickly being replaced with frustration. I felt like I was less than 2 seconds from putting my fist through the frickin' mirror, straight into his smug-ass face. "You know what? Go to hell," I shouted before storming out of the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. "Hey, what's all that about?" my mum asked, peeking around the corner from the kitchen. I gave her the classic, "Nothing, Ma," line, before grabbing my book bag from my room and heading out for school. Well, despite what happened, I was determined to keep my good mood going. I wasn't going to let some asshole in the mirror ruin my day. On the drive to school, though, I started thinking about it again. What does he mean by becoming me? Nothing about that made any sense to me. I mean, for starters, how exactly would he become me? What did that even mean? That led to the other thing he kept saying about how he was what I should be. What the hell did that mean, too? I actually ended up with the onset of a migraine from trying to rack my head around this shit. So I shook it off when I got to school. Whatever happened, in my head or not, I told myself that it was nothing. I was going to have a good day, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone take that from me. Well, like this morning, it actually seemed to work. For a while, I felt good about myself. I felt like I was a certified badass. At least until lunch, where, in front of everyone, including Janet, I was accidentally tripped by Victor Coleman, captain of the school's varsity football team. This caused me to faceplant straight into my lunch tray, covering my face with the ranch dressing I had on my salad. Unfortunately, this also caused my open milk carton to slosh out, splashing across the front of him. Looking at his face, now almost foaming at the mouth with rage, I took off quicker than I'd ever thought possible towards the bathrooms. I could hear him chasing after me at ramming speed, like a bull that was ready to run me through with its horns. To my utter relief, though, I managed to actually make it and slam the door right as Victor crashed into it. "Come out here, you frickin' pussy," shouted Victor from the other side of the door. Pressed against the door, I could feel several loud bangs from the other side, from him trying to ram through it. Finally, though, he seemed to give up, and everything was quiet again. I spent the remainder of the lunch period hiding in the bathroom. "Well, look at you," I heard as I was cleaning myself up. I looked up and, you guessed it, there he was, complete with his snide-ass smirk. "How's it going, huh? Being a badass and all?" "Oh, fuck off," I growled. Oh, this was just what I needed, right? To be kicked while I'm already down? Well, you laughed at this. "Look, I told you. I just call shit the way I see it. Come on, you can't keep lying to yourself here. You know you can't face the world. Just look at yourself. I mean, really look." And for a second he disappeared, and I saw myself again, my true self. How much of a puny, ugly loser I looked like. I was horrified. No, this isn't me. Is it? I'm not this ugly, am I? I started shaking my head. This isn't real. He isn't real. None of this is real. It's all in your... Oh, how dense are you? I looked again to see he was back, staring at me in annoyance. Have you not heard a single damn word I've been telling you? If I was in your head, I wouldn't be here. What are you talking about? Beware. In here, he replied, pointing his finger downward. In the mirror. If I was in your head, you wouldn't be in this situation right now, hiding with your tail between your legs in the bathroom. Think about it. If I was inside your head, you wouldn't be a failure. You wouldn't go to sleep and wake up every day a loser. I was flawed. I wanted to tell him to cram all of this and his smug smirk straight up his ass. Moreover, I still wanted to believe that this was all just extreme self-loathing, that this person, this thing in the mirror, was just a figment of my imagination. But seeing myself then, the way I truly looked in the mirror, I couldn't find the strength to voice any kind of argument. He was right. I was still just a coward and a loser. I still couldn't get anything right with anything or anyone. I'd wanted so badly for him to be wrong, but I knew, deep down, that he wasn't. My eyes were starting to burn with tears. Here, he said, holding his hand out towards me again. Come with me. Trade places with me. Let me take over out there and I'll make everything better. I stood there, looking at his outstretched hand. I could feel my body shaking, both from excitement and anxiety. The muscles in my arm twitched, wanting to move forward toward the mirror. Come on, Lanny. Take my hand and everything will be all better. But what'll happen to me? Don't you worry about that. I've already taken care of that. You'll take my place in here while I take the driver's seat. Just know that I'll make everything better for you out there. How's that sound, huh? Well, I won't lie. I don't know exactly what it is about how he said this, but I actually felt convinced. I know that you're probably thinking, why in the world would I fall for some shit like this? Don't I watch TV? Does this ever end well? And you know what? You're absolutely right about all of that. But I don't exactly expect you to really get it. It wasn't you that truly saw yourself for the open failure that you were. It was me, and I was sick of it. I was done going to sleep and waking up a failure every day, like he said. I was done with feeling self-conscious every time I looked in the mirror. I was done feeling bad about having to feel bad about saying that just because I'm a guy. I was done having to feel. I slowly reached up to the mirror where his hand was. I watched his smile widen the closer my hand came to his. As soon as it was only an inch from the mirror, I heard the bell ring, signaling the end of lunch. For only a brief moment I glimpsed the reflection's face, no longer looking like a perfect version of me, but now had a concave face with albino skin pulled taut over his skull, as well as two pitch-black craters that leaked some sort of bright purple ichor where his eyes had been, and several rows of crooked, jagged teeth. Before I'd been able to back out and run, though, I felt something cold and tight wrap around my wrist and forcefully jerk me towards the mirror. Everything seemed to go dark, but the only way I can really describe what happened next is that something seemed to pull me out of my body. Think of what it's like to have someone reach through your stomach and pull your insides out like they were pulling out the insides of a pumpkin. It was basically that, except I felt no pain. Instead, it was more just a sense of pressure, and then bop, and then I felt completely empty. The next thing I'm able to see is just a bright, white ball in the middle of a black, purgatorial expanse around me. It's far back in the distance, and I struggle to try and reach out for it. That was when I noticed that I couldn't see my arms. Then, even more horrifying, I looked down to see I didn't even have a body anymore. Instead, I was a ball of ashy white steam or mist. I wanted to scream harder than I've ever done before, but when I opened my mouth, I was unable to make any sort of sound at all. I tried to move towards the white circle again. It felt like all of Earth's gravity was bearing down on me, while at the same time feeling completely weightless. Eventually, I managed to scramble my way to it and looked into it. I could see the school bathroom with me, or at least my body, standing there, staring back at me with that familiar shit-eating smirk parting the left corner of its mouth. I tried again to scream, even harder this time, demanding he fix whatever he'd just done to me and give me my body back. But nothing sounded. He leaned in close, still smirking, and I heard him say, "Thanks for this. Don't worry, I'll make everything better. Have fun." He then chuckled before turning and leaving the bathroom. I was trying feebly to push my way back through the white circle, back into the outside world, to no purpose. I stopped when I felt myself being pulled back away from the hole. Looking back, I saw that, somehow, despite everything around me being dark and empty as it was, it seemed to actually get even darker the further back I went. Or to best describe it, it's like what you hear a black hole in space is like, a place where light is stretched out and ripped apart, dissolving into nothing. That's exactly what it felt like was happening to me too, when I was pulled into it. Despite what I said earlier about not feeling my soul getting ejected from my body when I was pulled into the mirror, this was the opposite. I felt it. Everything. Every agonizing second as I was pulled and stretched in every direction humanly possible, as well as some that weren't. I began to very slowly erode in the pit or void of advanced darkness. It almost didn't seem to end. What was worse was that I couldn't even lose consciousness through any of it. I was awake. I was lucid. I was forced to endure all of this without even being able to lose my mind. I don't know exactly when it all actually did end, time seeming not to exist where I was, but finally I was released from the void out into the open purgatory again. I saw there was another white glowing circle ahead of me. Like before, it took tremendous effort, but I managed to find my way to it. Looking out, I could see the face of a man, probably early, mid-20s, standing in a small, dirty motel bathroom. His eyes were sunken, his skin pale and sagging like it was a size too big for his bones. He was sullen, depressed, and looked sick. I watched him splash water on his face before taking out a pill bottle and downing 5 of them. Looking closer, I saw that the label read Prozac. I instantly felt a wave of alarm rush through me. "What the hell are you doing?" It took me a moment to realize that my voice actually worked now. He looked up to me. I don't know how I must have appeared to him, but he seemed confused, like how I was in his position, and began touching his face. "What the?" I heard him say, shocked and bewildered. "Who are you?" I hesitated for a moment. Wasn't sure how to answer him. Like I said, I don't know what I actually looked like to him. From my end, I was still a shapeless apparition with dark holes for eyes. But I guess, given that he didn't immediately run screaming, that this wasn't what he saw. I must have appeared somewhat familiar to him. Realizing this, a strong sense of familiarity, déjà vu, if you will, like I'd been through this similar instance before, and the big question started coming to me. Was this what the, for lack of a better term, other me had experienced? Was this what it was like for him? Did he have to suffer the agony from the black hole that I did? I've come to offer you an out, a way to be better, to be me. And that's when it all finally hit me. It all made sense now, and I was horrified. I finally understood why he was so persistent with me, why he wouldn't leave me alone. Every time I dodged him, he must have been sucked away, forced back into the void to be torn apart by the fathomless darkness. I wondered then what it must have been like for him when he was still human, when he was still whole before being pulled to the other side. How long, I wondered, had he had to suffer like this? Looking at this man in front of me, this depressed, drugged-out shell, I started thinking of every insult my reflection had thrown my way. I started to realize that it wasn't out of arrogance. He didn't believe what he'd said about how much better than me he was. How could he? But I understood now. He was desperate. He was as desperate for an out as I was. He was just as miserable and yearning for the pain to end as I was, just like I was to the man in front of me, and he was willing to say or do anything to get out. I realized then that that's what I'd have to do as well. I'm you, I declared finally, sounding as confident as possible. He looked at me, cocking his eyebrow. Well, no, I'm actually better than you. The hell does that mean? He looked at the pill bottle in confusion before looking back to me and shaking his head. I mean that I'm a better you, and no, I'm not just a side effect of the happy pills either. I'm real and I want to help you. He scoffed. Right, you're going to help me? Even the frickin' shrinks can't help me. What are you going to do? I couldn't help but smile at this. Not because I was happy or even because of my excitement to get out, but just the sheer irony of it. I want to make you an offer. Trade places with me. Let me take over out there. I'll make everything better. You can probably see how this plays out now. Granted, it actually took a few tries, each failure resulting in me being pulled back to the void to be pulled apart again, but eventually the opportunity came. He'd just lost his job and found out his girlfriend had been sleeping around with another, far better off man than him. Worse still for him, he was out of his supply of the Prozac. In short, he was at his breaking point, which meant that all it would take was one more offer to persuade him to take my place in the mirror. All I had to do was say the right words and I was out of here. And say them I did. And free I was. Take my hand and everything will be all better. You know how I said it felt painless when I was forced from my body into the mirror? Well, it was the opposite coming out. It felt like I was being pressed and stuffed into a box that was far too small. It was suffocating at first, but it only took a couple of seconds before I adjusted. I had a body again. I was a person again. I could talk, I could scream, shout, cry, laugh. I could feel. I looked at the bathroom mirror. For a brief moment I saw him. A gaunt, white, misty face with two pitch-black holes where his eyes used to be. His mouth open wide, screaming. He was then pulled back from the mirror, sucked away into the void to suffer like I had. I have to admit, I felt sorry for him when I saw this. But at the same time, I had to get out. Thank you. I'll make everything better. And since then, I've done just that. Using this man's face, I've managed to restore most of what he was missing in his life. His body, which used to look like it was already almost 1 foot in the grave, despite him only being 28 years old, now looks healthy. In fact, it looks handsome even, having taken up a membership at a nearby fitness center. He now has a job as a web designer, utilizing the IT obsession I'd had in my former life. He's even talking to a new girl now. One that has his old squeeze beat every which way from Sunday. His life is actually better now. even if he can't live it. I like to think of it as the least I can do for him after what he did. I live now wearing his face, using his name, Isaac Nalder, and I'll live the best life possible, both for him and myself. Oh, and I decided to smash every mirror in the apartment, and I always make it a point to avoid mirrors. I do this because I know what I'll see. There'll be another person, another poor soul like me and the others, who's just desperate to escape. And this is why anytime I have self-doubts, anytime I feel like a failure, like I need to look in the mirror, I stop and remind myself of what waits on the other side. My friends call me Al, but, well, they are few and far between, the last one passing about 12 years ago. Now there's no one left to call me Al, and so I believe it's the right time to tell my tale to the world. I am a 96-year-old man, born September 4th, 1922, in Berkshire, Massachusetts. Being 96 years old, I can tell you that I've seen some wondrous and awe-inspiring things in my lifetime. When I was a young boy, I remember seeing people still riding horses and buggies out in the countryside. I remember listening to the radio at night for entertainment. I remember when DC Comics was first created and started selling their fantastic stories. And then time passed, and soon we were landing on the moon, watching movies on smaller screens in our own homes, talking with people across the country instantly on computers, and building bombs that could vaporize hundreds of thousands instantly and poison the rest of the world for the remaining survivors. Yes, along with the amazing wonders I've seen in this long lifetime, I've seen the myriad of horrible things that mankind has done to their fellow neighbors. A lot of the younger people in this world claim to be living in the worst of times, yet they have never known the fear that gripped the world during the early 1960s, when we all literally expected the entire world to explode. Tensions have died down enough so that people don't have the creeping suspicions that their own neighbors are agents of a foreign power, waiting for the opportunity to steal secrets of their country and use them to enslave the general populace. Yet, even when all these horrible experiences and realities flooded our world with despair, anger, and hopelessness, I kept on smiling, content. You see, I experienced something during World War II, when I was serving with the OSS, or Office of Strategic Services, that changed me and my view of the world forever. A lot of men had their minds and souls altered by that tragic period of history, but I wasn't changed by any shell shock from being in the front lines, or from discovery of the massacres committed by the Nazis or the Empire of Japan. I never even went to the European or Pacific theater, yet I saw something worse than any soldier that was deployed to either one. I mentioned earlier, I worked for the OSS during the war. Now, for those of you who don't know, the OSS was the precursor to the CIA, created by FDR and based on the famous British SIS. Not only were we responsible for espionage action behind enemy lines, but we also were behind propaganda and subversion throughout the world, along with our MI6 allies. Though many people in modern times may not be aware of it, South America was a huge battleground for the various intelligence agencies in the Allies and Axis powers. Mexico and Brazil, though officially neutral, were very cooperative to the Allies, while the nations of Argentina and Chile were sympathetic to the Axis powers, and became major points of Operation Bolivar, which involved transporting intelligence via radio and ship to Berlin. It was the fall of 1942, and being a young buck of 20 and filled with patriotic zealotry, I was ecstatic to be assigned my first field mission, taking place in the jungles of the Misiones province of Argentina. There had been reports that multiple agents of the Sicherheitsdienst des Reichsführers, SAS, aka the SD, was seen entering the jungle with many different containers of unknown equipment. The SD was the intelligence service for the SS, so our higher-ups knew that something big could have been underway in the dark canopies where our recon planes were blind. Preferring to be safe than sorry, they ordered me and 6 other agents to find these SD agents, capture them, and find out what they were doing. We were all deployed in Paraguay, as that was the safest place for us to be deployed without arousing the prying eyes of the Nazi spy network. Every one of the 7 agents sent into the jungle had codenames corresponding to our founding fathers. The 7 of us were John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, John Hay, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and George Washington. Washington was the one in charge, of course, and I was John Adams within the lot. I don't know why they assigned us these names. Maybe they thought it would boost our morale being named after America's founders. I can't say. Whatever the reason, the 7 of us were just glad we had each other, no matter what our names were, as we began our expedition into the dense jungles of Misiones. Ahead of us was a hot, humid forest of both beauty and danger that none of us had ever experienced in our lives. To this day, over all the exquisite pieces of art I've seen hanging up in museums across the globe, I place the lush, life-filled primeval forest of Misiones as the most beautiful thing I've ever seen on this world. On the flip side of that coin, the eldritch monstrosities that awaited myself and my companions within those dense trees has forever instilled in me an instinctual terror of any forest, and I would rather be tortured to death than take another step into that place. We'd been briefed about our mission, but as we began our foray into the overgrown undergrowth, Washington filled the rest of us in on important details that only he'd been privy to. The SD agents, 4 in total, had been in contact with a local tribe native to the area and seemed to be cooperating with them in some way. One of the containers the SD were bringing into the jungle with them had been broken into, and the contents photographed by one of our agents. Our expectations of what had been in the container could not have been more wrong. Instead of weapons, medicine, food, or intel, the container had been filled with cultural items. There was golden jewelry, Nazi propaganda, history books, pictures of Adolf Hitler and his inner circle, things that were considered gifts in the civilized world. That was why our orders were to capture and interrogate. The Allies wanted to know for whom these gifts were intended. That was also the reason all of us were dressed in Nazi soldier garb and given Nazi weapons. Even though only Washington and Franklin spoke German fluently, the higher-ups hoped our disguises would get us close enough to the 4 SD agents so we didn't have to shoot them. I can't say I enjoyed wearing the clothing of our enemies, but I was a man who followed orders and swallows his pride for the good of our nation. Washington continued to tell us we had an idea of the general area of where the SD agents could be, but that was about it. The plan was to get as deep into the jungle as possible the first 2 days, and then split into 3 groups. 2 pairs of 2 would scout in opposite directions, while the remaining 3 would set up a base camp. The 2 groups would report back to later. However, right then and there, Washington told us how stupid that plan was, and that was not going to be how this mission went. We will be sticking together, using 7 pairs of eyes to flush out signs of Nazi occupation. If we encountered any resistance, 7 guns would be used to wipe it out. When we encountered the SD agents, 7 bodies would be there to tackle them to the ground, and 7 scary American faces would make them spill their guts. Everyone liked this plan far better than the first, and we continued our march with smiles on our faces. Our enthusiasm about the mission faded with the setting sun. An exhausting day of trekking through unknown territory, combined with seeing things like spiders bigger than our fists catching and eating birds, had drained us physically and mentally. All of us had spent time camping in woodlands, but none of us had ever experienced anything like this. Even when we stopped at night to rest, we didn't really get very much. Though we had a fire, it had to be a small one so as to not attract unwanted attention. Even with the small amount of light produced from the flames, we could see countless glowing eyes watching us from the foliage surrounding us. Our ears were bombarded with unfamiliar calls of creatures, and the fear of being ambushed by a jungle cat, Nazi-friendly natives, or something still undiscovered by science, dwelling in the dark depths of the jungle, let us have fitful sleep at best. Though we always had a man on watch, even the knowledge that one of our companions had our backs didn't really help. When dawn came, we ate lightly and resumed our search. This became our routine for the next 5 days. Every day we would see at least one beauteous sight the jungle would be inclined to show us, and experience one more horror that awaited within these dense leaves and plants of the shadowy place. I can recall clearest on the 3rd day that we discovered a hidden grotto with an amazing-looking pond. The sunlight gleamed against the water, making it shine brighter than any jewel I'd ever seen before. Yet, when Franklin went to fill his canteen, a snake larger than anything I'd seen sprang forth from the water and wrapped itself around him, both squeezing the life out of him and trying to drag him back into the water to drown him. Luckily for Franklin, the other 6 of us were upon the monster in an instant, hacking and stabbing the beast with our knives, killing it before it had a chance to kill Franklin or break any of his bones. 5 of us, including me, found out later that night that giant snake tastes like chicken. It was in the afternoon on the 6th day that Jefferson discovered a boot print in the muck. We all took a look and collectively agreed that this was a Nazi boot, as we didn't think any of the natives would be wearing boots or shoes at all. Washington ordered us all to fan out, and we all began to slowly and stealthily follow the direction the tracks seemed to be going. Every once in a while, someone would report to the rest of us that they found another boot mark, and we would adjust our direction accordingly. Every track we discovered seemed more and more recent, and by the time the sun set on the 6th day, we came across the native village the SD agents were staying in. Now, in my old age, I've made it a point to try and expand my mind and rid myself of the many stereotypes of the different people of the world that had been all I knew in my youth. An example of this is my knowledge of Native Americans. Growing up, it was a typical cowboys and Indians games with the rest of my neighborhood kids, and we portrayed them in a very unfair and very spiteful way. Traveling the southwest and northwest and visiting the tribes that lived there when I was in my 60s, I discovered complex cultures and skillful pottery, amazing beadwork and beautiful dances, with proud and kind people behind them all. No one culture is perfect, but I know that almost everything that had been pushed on me about Native Americans in my youth have been cruel misrepresentations. But, well, the tribe we discovered in those dark depths of the Argentinian jungle, they were every bad story of native cruelty and savagery come to life. The clearing we came across that housed the village was on a downward slope that put us about 10 feet higher than the place. We could clearly see, even in the dying light, the village had a crude wall of cut logs surrounding it. From the light of torches that were spanned across the top of the wall, we could identify that attached to the outside of the wall were primitive spikes. Every spike was occupied by some part of the human body, arms, legs, or full torsos. Some were fresh, blood still slowly seeping out of the wound used to separate it from the body, while others were so old they were almost completely skeletal. It was nice that all of us were still spread out from one another, so that no one vomited on anyone else but themselves. I think Washington was the only one who didn't wrench, thanks to being a veteran of the First World War. Gathering together, Washington began formulating a plan in whispers, when Hamilton suddenly interjected with, "Hey, did you guys hear that?" Washington was about to berate him for interrupting, but then the sound reached all of our ears, and he remained silent in order to listen. Through the typical nighttime jungle noises, there was a faint chanting upon the air. From the looks on the other agents' faces, I could tell that none of us were familiar with the language. Though I couldn't understand a single word that was being chanted, something in my mind was actively repulsed by the chorus of human voices. Whatever was being spoken just felt wrong, like no human should be speaking that dreaded dialect. It caused myself and Madison to shiver involuntarily. Our position on the high ground enabled us to spot two entrances into the village, on the left and right side of us. After grimacing from the sound of the eerie chanting, slowly growing loudly with every passing second, Washington told us the battle plan. We were to split into two groups, one for each of the entrances to the village. The group of 3 would see what was going on in the village and determine if the SD agents were there. If they weren't, the 3 would leave, meet up with the other 4, and we would continue our search in the jungle. If they were there, the 3 would cause panic with gunfire and grenades. We were ordered to do our best to avoid killing the natives, but there would be no repercussions if we did. The SD agents, on the other hand, were only to be killed if absolutely necessary. Hopefully, the agents would attempt to flee out the second opening in the wall, where the group of 4 would capture them at gunpoint. It was myself, Hamilton, and Jay who were chosen to be the 3 infiltrating agents. Checking our weapons and ammo, we crept down to the wall and made our way slowly to the left entrance of the village, all the while gritting our teeth as the infernal chanting continued to attack our senses and sanity. When we reached the left opening in the wall, we were a bit surprised to find no guards posted there. We were a bit surprised, but chalked it up to good fortune, and doing our best to keep ourselves in the shadows, we sneaked into the village. The huts that served as homes within that unhallowed place were far worse than the wall we had encountered when we first entered the clearing. Clumps of skulls hung from every hut's doorway, some of them still bearing rotting flesh. Skin was stretched into canvases, where scenes of torture, rape, and general mayhem were somehow seared in with amazing detail. The smell was horrific, a mixture of rot and decay, fresh blood and fecal matter, burning meat and exotic spices. Hamilton and I had to pause to get our stomachs under control, while Jay wasn't fast enough and vomited as quietly as he could behind a hut. Wiping his mouth, he gave the 2 of us a determined look, which we shared back with him, and we continued our stealthy approach to where we determined was the center of the community. Hiding in the shadows of a larger hut, we came across a scene of absolute monstrosity within the center of the village. It looked like all the inhabitants, I think about 75 in total, were gathered there, their bodies painted completely black, wearing loose loincloths that seemed to be made of human skin. They all had their backs to us, facing a raised wooden platform around 7 feet off the ground. The throng of natives was the source of that horrid warble that had reached a loud crescendo, forcing me to use all my willpower to not place my hands across my ears and scream to try and drown it out. On the raised platform, I could see a shrine and an altar. The shrine was a mixture of primitive art and tools. All looked to be fashioned from bones and leather of men, and of articles that were similar to what Washington had told us was found in the one container of the SD agents. I could make out the glint of weird-looking golden statues, a stack of books, a stormtrooper helmet, and a picture of Hitler mixed in with the horrendous tributaries. The SD agents were on the platform, along with an older native man in an impeccable and abominable headdress, and a young girl. The old native man was clearly a shaman, dressed in ceremonial garb that matched the horribleness of his headdress. The 4 men in black leather coats each held on to the struggling and screaming girl's limbs upon the altar with one arm, and held aloft a chunk of black stone in the other. Triumphant and nefarious grins were plastered on their lips. and even at our distance, I could tell their eyes shone with a destructive light. The shaman, with the headdress made of gold, gems and skulls, was raging a large, malicious-looking stone dagger with 2 hands above his head. He was shouting something I could not understand as he brought the weapon over his head, but his intentions were as clear as day. My soul was screaming at me to stop this. Our mission was to capture and interrogate, but some primeval part of my instincts was telling me to kill them before it was too late. Too late for what? I did not know, but I knew something terrible would happen if we let that old man kill that young girl right there and then. I wanted to turn my head to Hamilton, who was beside me. I wanted to try and convince him that we needed to act right now and begin killing these fiends. But something told me the time to act was now, for the sake of the girl, for the sake of me, and for the sake of the world. I raised my Gavir 43 and fired. I used to be a decent shot, but I hadn't taken the time to aim properly on account of the recoil. Yet something in the universe, whether it be fate, luck, or divine providence, was on my side that night, for my bullet missed my target, yet hit its mark. The sacrifice was still made, and I regret to this day that I hadn't decided to shoot earlier to allow my marksmanship to be more accurate. But I got the job done. The native priest, who was my original target, plunged the dagger down into the chest of the young girl uninterrupted, his weapon causing her frightened shrieks to cease and her fear-filled struggles to go limp. Yet, as the dagger was rushing down to meet with flesh, my bullet rocketed into one of the obsidian crystals the SD agents held aloft, shattering it into 1,000,000 tiny pieces right before the dagger met its victim. 100 things seemed to happen all at once after that. The crowd immediately stopped chanting and was silent. The shaman screamed in both fury and fear as the body of the girl began to spasm uncontrollably. The 4 SD agents backed away from the altar, stark terror adorning their faces. The 3 remaining crystals that had been held aloft were floating in mid-air, an energy that looked like black lightning arcing between the 3 of them and culminating in the chest of the child. The shaman was struggling to release the dagger and back away like the agents, but something was keeping his hands rooted to the dagger, and the dagger stuck firmly in the girl's chest. One of the agents, as he backed away, spotted the 3 of us and shouted something, reaching to his belt for his sidearm. That was when Hamilton and Jay started unloading indiscriminately with their MP40s into the crowd and the figures on the platform. I wish I could describe the ensuing battle that began, but I can't. I wasn't focused on the battle in the slightest. In fact, Jay would tell me later that more than a few bullets came inches away from hitting me as I stood there, seemingly in a trance. I told them all only once why I was just standing there, ignoring the chaos of the gunfight around me, and after none of them believed me, I changed my official story to a breakdown of nerves. It was easiest for me just to lie. But now I don't have to spin that facade anymore. I can finally speak the truth after decades of falsehoods. A dark portal was appearing from within the chest of the dead girl, the same hue of black that radiated and crackled between the 3 stones. It stretched from palm to palm, reached down to her right foot, but could not go any further. The final form of this dark portal was a half circle, its center line cutting straight from left palm to right angle, with the shaman and his dagger in the center. He was trying to break free of the darkness, yelling something and constantly shifting his hate-filled gaze from me back to the inky blackness. And that's when I noticed he was talking to something within that demonic gateway, for indeed, it was a gate. Black tendrils, so void of light they stood out against the surrounding twilight, were slithering from the portal, slowly wrapping themselves around the man as he wailed in protest and horror. Ever so slowly, they began to drag him into the abyss, ignoring his thrashing and pleading, and I saw his flesh peeling off every inch of him that touched that unnatural darkness. It took only moments, but it felt like years before his head was the only thing left in our world, aside from the piles of skin on the edges of the gateway. He gave me one last look of absolute loathing before his face disappeared into the lightlessness of the void, his headdress falling with a clank to the platform. And then the eye appeared. It was massive, too big for the portal to reveal its true size, yet I still gazed upon its many pupils, its constant shape and colour changing iris, and the malicious intent it held for the one who had ruined its return to this earth. Its stare forever left a scar upon my soul, for I knew then that I was beheld with animosity by a being that could be considered a god. It had been so close to stepping into our mortal plane, yet this human, this bug, this insignificant assembly of atoms, had stopped it dead in its tracks, earning me its eternal loathing. If it ever had the chance, it would do things to me, torture me with methods beyond the comprehension of what even the most sadistic psychopath could dream. Then it was gone, vanishing within the portal as the 3 obsidian stones shattered and fell to the platform. It took a violent shaking from Jay to fully awaken me from my rapture, and I found out I'd missed the whole party. In front of me lay 15 dead natives from the crowd. On the platform was the body of one of the SD agents, completely shot up, and what remained of the girl. Everything except her head and complete left leg had vanished into thin air. None of the other agents could explain what had happened to her. When Hamilton, Jay, and I went to the entrance where the other 4 awaited, we came across another gruesome scene. 20 or so natives were dead. 2 of the SD agents were also dead, and the last one was dying, talking quietly with Washington as he bled out. I've never seen a man's face so pale with fear as Washington's was. Whatever that Nazi was whispering in his ear, it was nothing pleasant. As we approached, the dying SD agent noticed me and turned to look at me with a smug expression of defiance. "You may have stopped him from entering his kingdom this time," he said in perfect English. "It may take 100 more years, maybe even 1,000. But the world will run red with the blood of men again, and he shall be led through, and on that day the Reich shall welcome him and bask in his glory, and all you fools will beg for mercy, and receive none. He will tear your souls apart, along with this world. He will rebuild it in his image, and the glorious Reich shall be his angels for eternity." The SD agent hacked up some blood, tried to say more, couldn't, shuddered violently, and then died. The rest of the mission, well, there isn't much to talk about. We gathered what valuables and potential pieces of interest that we could, and made our way out of the jungle. The night I told the rest of the group what I'd seen, and they didn't believe me, I managed to ask Washington, in private, what the SD agent had told him. His face paled at even remembering his words, and all he could say was, "Just the ravings of a dying, insane man. Nothing more." I found out a few years later that Washington hanged himself soon after the mission. His suicide note reading only, "No proof that he was right, but no proof that he was wrong. I don't want to take that chance. God rest his soul." So, here we are, 2019. I'm the last surviving member of that team, and have no family left to tell this story to. My wife and son are both long dead, though they're officially still missing. That's the problem with being a spy. The only spies people want to hear about are captured spies and dead spies. I wish they'd had the decency just to go after me and leave my family alone. But decency is hard to come by in this world. And mercy and goodwill don't exist in the secret wars waged by the big governments of this planet. But no big public wars have covered the lands with blood again, and I'm always thankful for that. The rise of Nazis across the globe again is a bit disconcerting, but they're nothing compared to the originals, so I'm not too worried. The fact that Earth and everything living on it is in our power to create or destroy brings me comfort. I'm not saying that I'd be happy if we ended up blowing up the planet, but, well, the idea that our own destruction is in our hands, that we as a species have a choice in our own survival or extinction, that's what helps me sleep at night. I've seen the alternative in my dreams. I see what happens if my bullet misses that black crystal, and the otherworldly abomination those SD agents call God gets a full gateway to enter our world. I see that monstrous eye gazing at every living soul across the globe, unleashing torments and sufferings upon the general populace of the planet. I hear the screams and pleads for death as massive, black-clothed beings fly through the sky, their halos a blood-red swastika that drips pestilence and poison onto the people. I smell and taste the acrid air, filled with stench of rot and sickness, the iron of blood so thick you can taste it. But most of all, I feel the hostility towards me like a fire, burning away my skin and charring my muscle and bone. I awake screaming, and though my senses return and ground me in reality, I know that it's still out there somewhere, waiting for its chance to return. I know that it's still watching me with that gargantuan eye, and I know that it is still furious. My heart stopped for a second. In the distance, a castle towered over the rest of the landscape. With each crack of thunder and spear of lightning, the gigantic, fleshy structure was silhouetted in the shadows. Purple clouds hovered over the fortress. It stretched a mile or two wide. In the center was a spire that rose into the sky, almost up to the clouds. Everything went black for a second. With the boom of thunder, a blue lance shot across the sky and lit up the castle again. At the top of the tower was a bulbous yellow eye. A dark pupil sat in the middle. The eye blinked and everything went dark again. The castle brought back all the memories of my fighting days in Oklahoma. The last time I'd seen one of these fortresses was out in the sprawling oaky countryside. Another freedom fighter once said to me, "They make them castles 'cause they're trying to show us who's king now." Afterwards he chuckled, cracked his neck and said, "I show them who's king." Well, the next day I found his body on the battlefield in 6 different pieces. My Humvee's headlights illuminated the road ahead of me. Rats scurried across the street. Rain beat against the windows. I had flashbacks from the day before. The sound of thunder replaced the singing of the cannons, and the rain was a dull drone of gunshots. I reached the edge of the parking lot. The movie theater was decaying. Moss and lichens draped the cracking walls like Christmas tinsel. 2 letters were still left hanging on the side. "TH," they read. The rest had fallen and shattered on the pavement. I rolled to a halt by the front entry doors. Vines dangled from the overhang. I paused for a moment, then a distant scream echoed in my mind. Another flashback. Another mutilated corpse. I threw the Humvee into park, stole the key from the ignition and lifted my helmet onto my head, turning on the night vision. I stepped out of the Humvee. The world shaded green by night vision. Fleshy tentacles tickled the air, sticking out from behind an abandoned hover speeder in the parking lot. When I blinked, the tentacles were gone. My insides were wriggling like worms. I shivered. My knees tickled like they might buckle and give out if I hallucinated the tentacles again. Locking the Humvee behind me, I entered the theater. A blurred figure stood in the distance, by the snack bar, obscured by the helmet's low-quality optics. I felt my skin flaring when I noticed him at first. I turned off the night vision and switched on my headlamps. His figure had lost most of its muscle now. When I first met him, when I was 4, he was tall and his muscles were bulging. The man who stood there was a skeleton now. He held a mouldy paper cup in his hand, eyeing it down behind the mask of his helmet. "Maybe cut the lights," he whispered, his voice echoing across the theater. "Oh, right," I said. "Sorry." I heard his footsteps as he approached me, reaching out a hand to shake mine. I gripped it and shook, looking into the mask that covered his face. Its appearance was distorted through the night vision, but I could see markings and paintings over his suit of armor. A rifle was slung over his shoulder, and he wore a bandolier stocked with grenades and flares. "It's been a long time," I grinned. "Only been 4 years," he shrugged, snickering. "How's that drink?" I asked. He scoffed. "Still good." He chucked the cup behind him. It splashed as it landed on the carpet. "Maybe keep it down," I joked. Piss off," he mumbled. "Christ, how I've missed you. How have you been?" "Oh, I've been good. At least I'm doing better than how we did in our Oklahoma days. How have you been?" "Oh, Jesus, don't remind me about Oklahoma. Fucking massacre. How do you expect me to be doing? We're at war." He patted me on the shoulder then. I threw my arm around his neck and we began to walk towards the snack counter. "Well, I see you're still the same man, at least in your head. Where'd all your muscles go?" "I've lost it. Times have been rough." "Really?" "I know we're fighting in the same state now, but you haven't seen the shit happening by Omaha. Did you see that stronghold out there? One with the massive eye?" I took my arm off him. He jumped over the counter, as did I. "Yeah, the one with the frickin' eye. You know how many attack runs we've done on that thing?" "Not sure I want to know. You're scaring me just talking about it." "We've done 23. 23 fucking raids." My jaw dropped, and I spun around to look at him. "You can't be serious. I mean, we only did 5 on that one in Oklahoma." "Yeah, that's what I told my commander," he exclaimed, shaking his head. I sniffed. There was mold growing in the back of the popcorn machine. The glass was shattered, leaving behind a thin metal frame. I imagined it being full of butter-scented, fluffy popcorn. More flashbacks. This time ones of childhood memories. Skateboarding downtown, lifting in the mornings before soccer, getting stranded on a country road at 3 a.m. "Remember that time we got kicked out of a movie theater with Martin and Xander?" I asked. He turned to me. I tried to imagine what he looked like beneath the helmet's mask. I hoped there was a smile underneath that. Was that the time when you launched a bowlful across the theater, and then you and Xander started fighting with it? And then came the usher. You goddamn idiots," he sneered. "Oh, let's hear about all the bright ideas you've had then." "Not getting kicked out?" I froze, and then I snickered to myself. I guess you and Martin were the smarter of us 4. I stepped over a pile of glass, watching a spider crawl along the wall. Very observant of you." "I'm a very observant person," I said. The spider trundled towards a drink dispenser. "Just as I've observed this drink machine." I pointed at it. "Fascinating, would you not agree, my acquaintance?" He coughed and shook his head. "Like I said, you and Xander, goddamn idiots." "Observe, comrade," I said, reaching out a hand. I pressed the black plastic lever that extended down from one of the soda dispensers. The lever snapped as a dollop of frigid slush splashed out of the machine. It coated my leather glove in muck. I cursed, pulled my hand away and shook off the goop. He chuckled for a moment, his arms crossed, leaning against the countertop. There was a spider making its way across the front of his helmet. "There's a spider." "I know," he said, smacking it and then shaking his gloved hand. "Listen, man, I've got a lot to tell you, and it's not exactly good news." "Yeah?" I asked. He nodded his head. "I'd love to stay here and talk for a while. I'd probably die for it, to be honest, but you and I have both got duties. We're already breaking them a little by even being here." "So, why'd you call me out here then? Just to see me for a bit, or what?" He shook his head. I chewed on the inside of my cheek, listening as the rain came down harder. A bolt of lightning flashed through the glass wall on the other end of the lobby. We'll get to that, but I want to say a few things." I stepped back a little, crunching the glass beneath my boots. I leaned against the drink machine, hearing a definite snap as I touched the plastic. Another splash of murky water dribbled from inside. "I'm all ears, Captain." "Great. You're gonna need those." He drew in a long breath and let out a heavy sigh. The thunder rumbled again. "I think I'm gonna be a dead man after a few days. That's the honest truth." "Don't say that." "There's only 100 men left in the Omaha Company. Haven't you heard?" Oh, I struggled to say the words. "You're kidding." "Last Saturday the Ravenous came. At least 1,000 of them, and they killed 300 of us. Probably didn't hear about it because the rest of the insurgency doesn't want you to know about it. We didn't stand a chance. They knew where every single one of us was. Don't know how, but they knew where every base, hideout, stronghold, and foxhole was. A few even got found in the tunnels. Now, with only 100 of us left, we're nothing against the second wave. It's coming. Don't know when, but it won't be long. Feels like they spared us, almost. You know what they can do." I swallowed the lump in my throat. A flash from outside illuminated the lobby. I'm sorry. How many civilian casualties?" The silence was cruel. 500, he mumbled. The number had the impact of a bullet. I didn't speak for a minute, neither did he. The rat squealed. I scanned the theater, feeling pins and needles all over my body. My hands vibrated, cursed with tremors. I controlled my shaking. "So, keep talking," I murmured. He cleared his throat. "I don't have anyone left to trust." He paused. "I know we fought a lot, sometimes with punches instead of words, but we always apologized after, and that'd be the end of it. I'd be a dead man if you hadn't been with me in Oklahoma. You'd have died too, if I wasn't there for you. Yeah, I'm getting sappy, but I don't think I'll ever get another chance to get this sappy with somebody. We're two very, very different people. You annoy the shit out of me sometimes, and I'm sure I piss you off plenty too, but I have no idea what the hell we'd do without each other." "You don't sound like yourself. I mean, you've never been much of a speech giver." He shrugged. "You deserve it. You've been my best friend. Always. Don't take this the wrong way, but you're an idiot. I taught you everything. How to talk to girls, how to get some balls. You know, life. But even then, you never used me as the father you never had. You never begged me to help you, and if you did, I told your ass right off. You were my best man at my wedding. You came over and surprised me when I got into college. You convinced me to keep playing guitar when I was going to quit. Called me when Brooke broke up with me and left a box of condoms on my porch as a joke. Stupid as hell, but I needed it that night." He started to choke on his words. "Hey, I love you to death, and I can't trust anyone else more than you." My eyes began to sting. My throat got tight, and all the words that had been building up there were now caught in a net. I opened my mouth to talk, but stopped. I swallowed all the emotion back and then took off my helmet. I tapped a button on my armor, and a white beam flashed from the light on my arm. I shone it on my face and spoke in a small, near-silent warble. "Take off your helmet," I told him. He hesitated, then, slow-like, his hands grasped the sides of his helmet. He pulled it off, holding it at his side with one hand. With the other he lit up his face. His eyes were sunken. Purple bags formed under them. His sandy blonde hair was unruly, a wet mop. Streaks of mud coated his chin and jawline. Oh, my friend looked like King Odysseus must have after coming home to Ithaca. He had that lost-at-sea look about him. Now the squirming feeling in my chest was replaced with a frigid, aching sensation. "I don't want you to die," I chirped, my voice disappearing. His eyes started to get puffy and red. "Don't you fucking cry on me now. If you've ever learned anything from me, it's that you don't need to cry about everything. Now, like I was trying to say, there wasn't ever another man on this planet that I trusted more than you, and if there was, they're probably dead now. There's not a lot left, but I know what remains." I stared at him, my lower lip twitching. My face began to get hot. I felt my skin turn cherry red. "Hope." I chuckled. "The years have changed you after all. No, it's not supposed to sound cliché. My daughter, Hope," he said matter-of-factly. Another mental bullet. I started to frown. "What do you mean?" I asked. A smirk appeared on his face. He scratched the back of his hand and took a few steps forward towards me. He put a hand on my shoulder, and I looked into his small, hazel eyes. "If I'm gonna die, I'm not taking Hope with me," he said. And this was the third bullet. I stammered as I tried to find the right words. I can't take care of her. She's your daughter." My voice began to trail. He shook his head. "What's the mission of insurgency?" he asked. I looked into his eyes again, and the answer came to me. "To fight the ravenous," I whispered. "Now, think about it." I did. Blue light shrouded us as a fork of electricity blasted across the Nebraska sky. "I've done you 1,000 favors over the years, and you paid me back by fighting at my side and saving my life a few times. But this is more than that. This is my everything." My lips flipped between frowns and smiles. I thought all of my organs were shriveling up and decaying as we spoke, and now I placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'll take good care of her. Norfolk's safe, at least it will be for a while." He raised his arm, covering his cough. "Perfect." There was another long silence now, filled only by the sounds of scampering animals and ambience of the storm. "I love you to death," I said. "I love you too, dumbass." He leaned in closer, wrapping his arms around me in an embrace. I held it for a while. We stood there, two grown-ass men hugging in an abandoned movie theater, for at least 30 seconds. He let go first. He started by putting his helmet back on and then turning off his light. I followed suit. "What remains is hope," I reminded him. He scoffed. "Idiot. That's more like it. Let's go pick her up. I got some squad mates watching her. She's not far from here. As soon as you get her, you'll speed till you're out of the city. Or at least until you're far enough away from the city that you can't see that fucking eye." "That motherfucking eye," I joked. He reached out his hand and I shook it once more. His grip had lost some of its strength. He now appeared even smaller than he already had at first. His hunched corpse stood before me, still armed and dressed in his battle armor. To fight the ravenous and protect the people, I thought. Right. We started to walk out of the theater. Now you tell your commanding officers you found Hope by accident.
I want you to take us somewhere in northwestern Nebraska if shit gets heated in Norfolk. Done my research. That's about the safest place. That's the Badlands. Less food. And less of the ravenous. I don't care. I paused. You got it, boss. Yeah, and I know you want your rations too, but don't forget to feed her. I'm listening. He shot me a look. And I got something big to ask of you. I frowned. Our walking slowed to a momentary halt. Yeah? If it comes down to it, you'll die for her, right? I winced. I tried to breathe as we started to walk again. Someone's got to look after her, I mumbled. We pushed our way out of the glass doors, walked out from underneath the overhang into the gushing rain. It was coming down heavier now. The earthy scent of mud and fresh rainfall filled the air. Lightning lit up the sky, revealing the castle in the distance. I stared into its bulging eye. I wondered if it could see us. I wondered if that's how they'd found all the freedom fighters. The Humvee unlocked as I pressed the button on the key and clambered into the driver's seat. I pushed the key into the ignition and turned, the engine roaring to life. The windshield wipers started up, waving the sheets of water off the glass. I removed my helmet and fastened my seatbelt. My friend settled in, stretching and scratching his chin. I guess we do have some time to talk now, I mentioned. He stared at me for a moment, a coy smile tugging at the edges of his lips. Just shut up and drive. And so once again, we reach the end of tonight's podcast. My thanks as always to the authors of those wonderful stories, and to you for taking the time to listen. Now, I'd ask one small favor of you. Wherever you get your podcast from, please write a few nice words and leave a 5-star review, as it really helps the podcast. That's it for this week, but I'll be back again same time, same place, and I do so hope you'll join me once more. Until next time, sweet dreams and bye-bye.